Good evening, everyone. We're about to go live with our study committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting Monday, November 9th, 2020. We've been doing our thing. This is our third, maybe fourth meeting. I'm not sure. I think our third meeting. And should be good. We'll get a work plan discussed, goals and scope hammered out, and then really break off into independent task groups. So we're looking forward to getting some work done and coming back with some tangibles going into the following meeting. So hold on, hang out, and we'll talk soon. Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Okay, Chuck, are you ready for me to turn it on?
I am. Thank you, sir.
All right.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening. Welcome to the study committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting for November 9th, 2020. Thank you for all for joining us tonight. And Diane, could you please go into roll call?
Sure. Due to the new state guide, oh, hang on just a minute. Sorry. I goofed myself. Due to the new state guidelines, tonight when we say who we are, we have to say your name, say you're present, and then say where you are joining from. Electronically from the city, county, and state. For example, if it were me, I would say County. Kelly Ellsworth Etchison.
Kelly Ellsworth Etchison, present. East Lansing.
Noel Garcia Jr.
Noel Garcia Jr., present. Ingham County, East Lansing, Michigan.
Chuck Grigsby.
Chuck Grigsby, present. East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Cedric Haro.
Cedric Haro, present. Mason, Michigan. Ingham County, Michigan.
East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Sharon Reed Davis. Timo Sharon. Chris Root.
You're muted,
And muted Chris.
I'm present. I'm in East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Quentin Tyler has told us that he's not able to attend tonight. He's traveling. Eric Williams.
Yes, I'm here from East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
And Tanya Williams is off sick today.
Thank you, Diana. We have quorum. I just wanted, before we go into approve an item or going to talk discussion about 1.2, I just want to do a couple of clarifications. Just with the technology, can you please, if you want to make a motion, just raise your hand, and when you want a second, please also raise your hand, because I'm having delays and sometimes I'm not seeing and hearing who's doing what. And I figured out it was my problem. Maybe my internet's a little bit slower. So please, if you get an opportunity to do that, just raise your hand and let me know who the one is if I don't get a chance to really see it visually on there. And that's about it. We'll go into item 1.2, approval of agenda of November 9th, 2020. Assuming that everyone's got a chance to look at that and there's no amendments, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Okay, it looks like it's been moved by Commissioner Root and seconded by Commissioner Harrell. Is there any discussion in regards to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving November 9th, 2020 agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So passed. Thank you. All right, we're going to move to item 1.3, and we're going to look at and talk about approving the minutes for October 26, 2020. Assuming that no one has any questions or amendments to those minutes, I will entertain a motion to approve October 26, 2020 minutes. All right, the motion is moved by Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison, seconded by Commissioner Harrell. Any discussion regarding the minutes? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, thank you. All right, we'll move to item 1.4, written communication. As you hopefully have had an opportunity to take a look at that information, is there any comments or reactions to what we have for written communication? We're talking about items 10, 26, 20 email from Commissioner Williams, and then New Orleans performance indicators, resources for 11/9/2020 meeting. Does anyone have any reaction or comments in regards to written communication that is there? Who may I ask who shared that information for the New Orleans performance indicators?
That was me.
Okay. And that was pertaining to the early warning systems that we had talked about in depth. And do you have any comments in regards to that? Because I thought it was a pretty good reference point for what we had discussed in our last meeting.
As I recall, Deputy Chief was talking about the early warning system, and I had happened to have a copy of those. I guess you call them triggers from the Louisiana New Orleans Police Department attached to their early warning system, and I put those up in the chat during the discussion. Those were the things that New Orleans Police Department looks at when they're reviewing the performance of police officers. And it was something that was, I believe, part of the consent decree when the federal government had sued New Orleans under the civil rights statute. New Orleans and the feds developed a consent decree. Part of the consent decree was New Orleans should develop an early warning system or early intervention system that looked at these performance factors. That's where that comes from.
Thank you. All right, that was really good. I liked it. Thank you for submitting that. It was something that really put a lot of what we had talked about. I didn't see it in the chat, so I thought it was new information. So thank you for doing that. Any other comments before we move on?
The only comment I have is I was unable to open the link on the resources for 11/9 meeting. For whatever reason, that link didn't open for me.
Is there any way that we can put that in the chat, the link of that in the chat for her to be able to pull up by chance, or is that?
I think it's possible. I apologize. It's possible that if you copy the URL and paste it in, it might work. Which is the link that you couldn't use? Do you remember which document?
It says resources for 11/9/2020 meeting. So I'll try and do that. I'll copy that and place it in the browser. See if that works. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item 1.5, pursuant to MCL 15263 subsection 1, limiting public comment to 5 minutes per individual for our communication from the audience today. Is something we did previously to what we had in our other meetings, and it sounds like we're going to continue that if we do approve that. So I'll look to entertain that motion to approve limiting public communication from the audience to 5 minutes. Do any of the commissioners not want to have a time limit this evening and just have the communication from the audience talk as long as they want? Or do you guys want some type of time limit on there?
I actually was waiting for like it to be approved and then got to support it and then discussion. I was going to make the friendly amendment I made last time where the 3 minute.
I'll move it.
So moved. Is there a second?
Discussion.
So moved by Commissioner Root. Is there a second?
I'll support.
Used to Commissioner Ellsworth Essenson.
My friendly amendment would be 3 minutes
Are there any other?
for public comment.
Thank you. Are there any other discussions or amendments to the motion on the floor? We now have it down limited to 3 minutes per individual for communication from the audience. Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Don't you have to ask Chris Root whether she accepts the friendly amendment?
Why don't we just have a vote on the amendment and then a vote on the final motion? That's the normal way to do it. I don't really understand the definition of friendly versus unfriendly. So we
Okay.
can just have simply.
So if I understand you correctly, you'd rather have the motion just be adopt the rule pursuant to MCL 15263
We
to
can
3
vote
minutes.
on Kelly's motion to change the limit to 3 minutes. And then if that's agreed to, then we vote on the motion as amended.
Okay. Is there any more discussion on 3 minute friendly amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, please say
We
aye.
didn't get a second on the change of the amendment, did we?
You're right.
Can I get a second on that amendment, please? Thank you, Commissioner Joseph, with a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right. Seeing that passed, one opposed, and so we're down to 3 minutes for the 1.5 item. All those approve that item to 3 minutes, please say aye. Is that where we're at?
Aye.
Moved by Commissioner Root, seconded by Commissioner Harrell. Any discussion on that 1.5 item? All those approved, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. So passed. All right. Going down to item 2.0, communication from the audience. Do we have anyone on the line?
Yes, we do. We have phone number ending in 552. You have been permitted to talk. You may unmute by dialing *6 to address the committee. Again, that's phone number. There you go.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, this is Kath Edsel, 6 Daisy. That now I got to see it because of that. It's just no.
Kath, can you just hold for just a quick second, Kath?
Eric shared a document with me on this information.
Kath, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
So we heard you talking, but we can't understand what you're saying, and I'm not sure if it's just an internet deal, but we haven't heard anything that you said. At least I haven't, and I apologize for that. So and we'll let you know if we can't hear you still going forward, please.
Okay. Can you understand what I'm saying now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wanted to comment on a couple of issues that Eric Williams has addressed in some information he provided for myself. Some of you may know I have been working with Eric and Chris Root prior to this commission being started. So I've had a finger in it a little bit since the beginning. I have one concern and one I'd really like to see addressed. And the concern is when we are relying on the police department to provide the oversight committee with the information to make the decisions or to advocate on behalf of the community, when the police department has a very long history of hiding information. And one of their tricks has been to say that is still under investigation. And so when we're talking about the committee only having information that the public can FOIA, and the police play this game with keeping things under investigation so it cannot be FOIA'd, then the Oversight Committee is denied the opportunity to see all of the information. We saw this very recently with the Human Relations Commission, who requested information on a number of accounts that complaints had been made in regards to, and they ended up receiving only a very small portion of the information they requested. ELI has had that issue in the past in obtaining information, and I personally have been declined information in a situation that is relevant to myself, with the caveat that there's an ongoing investigation, and they can make those ongoing investigations last until statutory timelines pass, until interest is lost, until whatever happens. But I think that it's really important that somehow that be addressed so that Oversight Committee can have all of the information they need to be able to be an active report committee. The second comment that I have
30 seconds
is
remaining.
Strong support for an early intervention system that and removal from the language that any previous issues are dropped off of an officer's record in a 2-year time period. We cannot improve unless we know the past history of an officer, that it's been addressed and that it continues to be addressed moving forward. And an early intervention system and that change to that language
3 minutes
would be an
has passed.
important step. Thank you. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Kat Ethsall, for your comments and your time and calling in this evening. It's very, very important that we get as much as we can from the community and their experiences and everything like that. Did any of the commissioners want to respond to the caller at all before I have what I had to say about it? I agree. I'm not sure, Chief Johnson, when she talked about the 2-year time period and going back, is that something, just for clarification, is that something that is a policy within the department, or is that comes from the labor and the POAM contract situation where you have previous behavior that only goes back 24 months, and then that person has the option to take it off their record, if you will. Is that an East Lansing policy, or is that just comes from the state? Where does that come from?
It's actually part of the labor agreement that we have to abide by, and so that's some of the stuff that we is just part of our labor agreement. And I think that Mr. Lahanas is going to have a labor attorney come in an opportunity to talk about what's in our contracts and things like that, and go forward from that standpoint, so we can all be on the same page as in what's in the agreements and things of that nature.
And I also mentioned that to add on to that, those are prescribed by level of discipline, the duration they'd stay usually effective, and then they could be removed at a certain point. But typically, I believe arbitrators, this is something we could ask our labor council, look at something 2 years back, and beyond 2 years, I don't think that they give much weight to things. So I think that there's sort of a practice amongst arbitrators to do the same thing. And I think things sort of fall off after a period of time, whether it's in your labor agreement or not. But that's my understanding as well.
Thank you, City Manager Lahanas and Chief Johnson, for that clarification. Just the second part of what the caller was talking about in regards to the early warning system. I know we talked a little bit about that in our last meeting, and I know we also talked about accreditation. Is that part of the conversation or part of the accreditation process that you will be seeking and looking more into that? I think Deputy Chief Gonzalez had said that the East Lansing Police Department was looking into it as a possibility, but I wasn't sure.
We are looking into it. We're proceeding with the accreditation process, which is going to take anywhere between 1 to 2 years. But the early warning system is actually a different piece of software that is actually separate from the accreditation process. But we haven't requested any budget monies or anything like that for that software. But it's going to be on our radar screen for us to move forward on that also.
Thank you. I know I just, as I said before in the last meeting, I got a chance to sit down with the Michigan State Police, and they use the Guardian tracking system, which really was a great way to keep track of a lot of different things, but also keep track of good behavior within the police department, and really a way to acknowledge those officers who are involved. I know Deputy Chief Gonzalez had mentioned something about the Lansing one. I think it's called the green system or something like that. Sorry.
Actually, it's close. Commissioner Garcia would know a little more about that.
It's called the blue team.
The blue team, not green. The blue team. Okay. Yeah, and
You have to change it to the green team, but
well, yeah, I'll leave that one alone. But thank you for those follow-ups on there. Is there any other reaction or comments in regards to written communication before we move on? Commissioner Harrell, please go ahead, and then Commissioner Williams.
So regarding the early warning systems, I think it might be useful too, because Deputy Chief Gonzalez had mentioned that the program that they had looked at had somewhere between a $3,000 to $7,000 annual cost, and that was deemed prohibitive. I think it might be worth looking at as an aspect of what we're doing now, some of the various options to see what sort of different pricing tiers there are. And so I sat in on a webinar from Benchmark Analytics, which has an early warning system that is designed for not just use of force incidents, but also sort of has a proactive laudatory element, right? So celebrating officers' good works in addition to this punishment aspect. I imagine something like that is probably slightly more expensive given everything that it does. So I think that's probably an aspect of the conversation, is figuring out, what the range is of potential costs so that we can make a recommendation on that basis.
Before you go, Commissioner Williams, I just want to comment. I did check in on the Guardian system. I think I said this last meeting. So from what when I talked to the representative and talked to him about the number of police that we have in this city and how appropriate it was, and all that kind of stuff, he said it was very appropriate. And he told me that the administrative cost to set it all up, just to give everyone a perspective, was about $3,500, somewhere around that range, to get it all set up. And then subsequently each year, the cost is only about $1,200 to $1,500 per year for the system. So just to give you perspective from at least one person I talked to, when you talk about, Commissioner Harrell, different tiers of that. And, I'm not quite, intimately aware of which one's which, but I just know the one that I had talked about with them. Commissioner Williams, please go ahead.
A couple of points. I presume that when the government is deciding whether to buy an asset like this, they consider not just the cost, but they compare the cost to the benefits. So there may be some benefits, monetary benefits, to having an early intervention system. For example, saving damage awards. So you'd want to weigh the costs against the benefits when you're making that decision. The other inquiry I wanted to make was whether these proprietary software systems, the Blue Team or the Guardian, whether they have anything like was discussed earlier, the list of performance indicators, and whether those have a according to their protocol, whether there's a look back period connected with the early intervention system. How far back in an officer's career do they look for these performance indicators?
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. I believe it's City Manager Lahanis, then Commissioner Garcia Noel.
I would just mention that I think that the commission probably should just make their best recommendation. You know, obviously costs are consideration of things, but several $1,000s per year for a software does not scare us at all. If that's something that people think is necessary or useful, but I wouldn't be constrained by a price like that. If we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, then we would have to, look more deeply. But with a $14 million budget, I don't think that would be a huge constraint at this point. But of course, you have to look at the whole package of what you all recommended. So I wouldn't be constrained by that at this point in terms of your recommendations.
I really appreciate that follow-up. We missed you on the last meeting in that discussion, so that really is, at least for some of us on here who've been bringing that up to our attention, we really appreciate that as something that's going to be considered. Please, Commissioner Garcia Jr.
Just from my experience with Blue Team years ago at Lansing Police Department, I was the Internal Affairs Lieutenant for 2 years, so I was very familiar with Blue Team. Mr. Williams, when I saw those indicators on your email, those were all very familiar in the Blue Team system. The time off that officers are taking, the sick time, pursuits, use of force, all those things. So I'm not sure if Blue Team is just more indicative of a medium-sized to larger department. That's one thing we need to look at. Or if what Mr. Grigsby's talking about and what he researched in that program would be beneficial, as long as it has all those things. And I want to say Blue Team is a little higher priced. I think the deputy chief mentioned that last time in our meeting, but I don't think it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I would certainly recommend that we look into Blue Team. It was very easy, user friendly to use. None of the command officers under me had any difficulties with it, so I just had to put in my 2 cents there.
Duly noted, Commissioner Garcia Jr., and that's definitely why you're on this team, to give us that inside scoop on things. Commissioner Harrell, please go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment on the caller's first point about essentially the ability for the Oversight Commission to have subpoena power. Historically, that has been the biggest point of contention that police unions have had in terms of how they deal with civilian oversight boards. But we just very recently, as in last Tuesday, saw, probably close to 24 police reform measures passed on the ballot at various state levels and municipalities. And a number of those have, with like 90% approval from the voters, sanctioned subpoena power for civilian oversight boards. So I just want us to keep that in mind, that despite what I believe is probably inevitable pushback from the union on that particular point, there's clearly a lot of public support for that, as evidenced by how those ballot initiatives did at the polls.
Thank you, Commissioner Harrell. I think we're moving on if there's no other comments. All right, thank you. We're going to move to new business, item 3.1. And this is a discussion in regards to December. Right now, we have already approved kind of our meeting schedule. And here locally, there is another big meeting that's happening on the date that we've already voted on. And I wanted to entertain a discussion about moving that meeting so we can get and maximize as much public comment as possible. The reason why that is that on December 14th, I believe, there's going to be a school board meeting here in East Lansing, which is a really big deal with the discussion of going back to school and all the different things that's going on with the pandemic. I think a lot of people will be dialed in. That may hurt our possible participation within our discussion meeting that we have set up currently. I did talk with Diane a little bit, and she talked with some other people, and there is no other meeting for the evening of December 7th, correct me if I'm wrong, Diane, but no other meeting designed for December 7th. But then there is a question is, will we be ready to have someone in a group talk to us from the community by that time, depending on what we're doing and everything like that. So I just wanted to open that up and get some feedback from maybe a commissioner or two in regards to possibly making a change with that meeting date for that December date only. So, were you about to say something, Commissioner Root?
I wonder if we could take a look at the work plan before making a final decision on the schedule. We could just switch, if we could go ahead to the next agenda item and then come back to this one. Because the work plan, which is definitely a draft, not only changes from December 14 to December 7, but it also suggests a second December meeting on the 21st, whereas our original idea was just to meet once in December and then have a long wait before the meetings pick up again in the new year. So it's a question of how many meetings we need.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. If I would have been thinking correctly, I would have had that moved automatically. It would have been a little more appropriate for the flow. Does anyone have a problem with moving that after 3.1 just down and discussing it after we get 3.2 a little bit more figured out? Is that okay? All right with you guys? I'm not hearing any feedback on that, so we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll move to item 3.2. And this is where we're in discussion with the work plan and work groups. And I believe Commissioner Root, who really championed the data, the information, the organizational piece to this, I think is really, really a great framework to build off of. And I'll just go ahead and hand it off to you, Commissioner Root.
Thanks, Chuck. I should have put my name on that in the interest of transparency. I wasn't trying to keep it secret, but I just didn't put it on. It is the result of a lot of things, but in particular, Sade and I had a lengthy conversation last week that I found really helpful. When she made the suggestion of considering how we were going to write our report and that we should be able to, section it out and think about what we could get done earlier, to me, that was an example of how we can't do everything in a whole group and actually get it done in a reasonable amount of time. So when she and I talked, I said, Sade, if we talk about goals tonight, will you feel satisfied if we have figured out goals by the end of our third meeting? And she said, no. She said, we really need to have a work plan and we need to have a way for people to start doing work. If we do that by the end of our third meeting, that will make a difference. And I said, okay, let's try to do that out of this conversation. So what this is, and this reflects other frustration people have expressed, I think, the last two meetings, that we didn't get to the work plan decision, although it was on our agenda. And some people talked about the need for subcommittees, and we didn't go in that direction. So we just were hanging. We didn't have a way to get to a work plan. So sort of as almost a model of, if a couple people get together between meetings, maybe you can put something on the agenda with some substance that people can talk about. That was what we were actually putting into practice here. So my suggestion is to see if there's kind of general agreement to the work plan, and then talk a little more specifically about the work groups. That if we could make a decision on the work groups so that people could actually sign up for them by the end of tonight, then we will really be able to move forward. That's the hope. So let me say just a few things about both the work plan and the subgroups. On the work plan, the first word is tentative, and that is really meant. One of the reasons it's hard to write a work plan is, how do you know what you're going to be doing 4 months from now? You don't know exactly, and you might need to change from what you're thinking today. But the idea is to have something, some kind of goal, some kind of concept of how to get from where you are now to the end. So that's really the spirit of this document. In particular, there are a couple people who've said, I don't see how we can get this done in a total of 6 months, which is now 5 months. This document is not intended to take a position on that question. What this document does is say, if we made our best effort to shoehorn everything in 5 months. What might it look like? So it's kind of meant to give a picture of that. I tried to include all the input from different people. I included things that were in George Johannes's work plan. I tried to include the presenters from Eric, although they're not all in there, and I don't know what to do about that fact. But there were more in there than on the earlier work plan, but I couldn't see how to put all of them in, which may tell us something. I used the NACOL guidebook 14 steps as a way to suggest how to break out the topics, which we talked about that at our second meeting. Those are pretty broad steps, so I think that may give us enough of a framework without limiting innovative or new ideas. I think probably a number of ideas can get included using that. It's just a way of sort of having a checklist of major issues that certainly need to be there. So let me say a couple other things about the work groups. Couple of things. Many of us went to the Open Meetings Act presentation, where we were told that committees and subcommittees that have only advisory authority may not fit the definition of public body, since they have no decision-making authority. In other words, if you meet the definition of public body, you have to be in open meetings, but subcommittees may not necessarily need that. And what I tried to do was conceptualize these subgroups in a way that they would not have any decision-making authority, and that there would be a clear way of communicating between the subgroups and the full group, so that the full group knows what's going on and the public also knows what's going on. So the suggestion is that anytime a subgroup does something before the next meeting, write up a little report, whether it's a little one or a big one, depending on how much work you did, and have it appended to the agenda. And that way the public and the committee members can see it. And also that no subgroup could be larger than 4 people, so that it's clearly below the quorum. I think those are the main points. George Lahanas had expressed at the first meeting that it's really preferable to have open meetings of subgroups in terms of transparency and the ability of staff to be of assistance. And then he said, because of that, anytime we have a subgroup meeting, it would really have to take the place of a full group meeting. I agree that transparency is important and staff support is important, but I just couldn't see a way to get all the work done in anything close to 6 months if every subgroup was a replacement for a full group meeting. And Sade and I just couldn't see how to get substantive work done without subgroups. Just putting words of topics into the agenda of full group meetings doesn't help you actually have substantive things to talk about that you can finish in 2 hours. So that was why the work plan incorporates subcommittees. And I use the word work groups because that has been used previously by the financial health review team that East Lansing had. There are 5 of them that Sade and I talked about. One on data reports, one on the structure and scope of the Oversight Commission, another on policy review, a 4th one on the report of the study committee, which Sade brought up last meeting. And then the 5th one is communication with stakeholders and other folks, the public input and unions. Not all of these would necessarily, keep going the entire remaining period of the study committee, but it seemed to me that all of them would really help us accomplish some things that we need to get done. So that's where this comes from. And it's over to the full group.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. Again, fantastic. great place for us to start and build off of. I just really am impressed and really looking forward to really jumping in and now have an opportunity to kind of really strategize how we're going to do that as a commission. So initial feedback from commissioners or staff or anything like that. It looks like Councilmember Bacon, you're muted.
You're always going to kind of hear the same thing from me. I think what will help you in generally, if we look out there, like-sized cities, like-sized commission, you mentioned two things today, monitoring and subpoena power. Outlining the actual things you want to acquire for the commission up front and studying it backwards. Like, this is the gold standard. This is the very best design for a commission that's out there. We want access to these things for East Lansing, and then building out what you want to hear about from that, kind of invert it from that perspective. That way you don't end up studying things that are never going to get worked in, and that way when you have the union in, you're going to seek subpoena power. That can be the kinds of questions that are addressed in that work meeting when the union comes on. Like, I think that'll save you a ton of time if we have a firm outline of what your goal is here for. What powers do you want this commission to have? I think that seems to be the missing link. I think that'll settle some of the study things and some of the other things, and what the gold standard is for if there's a city out there, if it's Ferguson, if it's wherever, and you've seen it built somewhere else. I'm not big on reinventing the wheel. I think it's out there. So if that's what you look, maybe that would be where I would start. Just a suggestion. It may save you a ton of trips around the mountain. So.
Thank you, Council Member Bacon. Any other comments? Yes, Commissioner Root.
The intention in this model was to have that the structure and scope subcommittee take a look at those issues. There is, I don't think I would be surprised. I don't have the perfect model that I'm just waiting to share with people. I think we're going to have to look at a number of things. My hunch is that we're going to find maybe in one city, we really like the way they're dealing with complaints. In another city, we think the way they're dealing with reviewing policy is better. I think it's going to take some research and to know what we are aiming for by looking at what the experience is in other cities. I agree with you that what's happening in other cities is the main information we're going to be seeking to know what we need. We're not going to try to just make it up, but I do think we need a group that's going to do quite a bit of research on that.
Yes, Councilmember Bacon, and then City Manager Lahanas.
Just for clarification, we're agreeing 100%. That we want to review policy. Check. Then best way, who's doing it best, and then we want subpoena power. Who does subpoena power best? Which model? That we want this monitoring system. Now we're studying based on 50-something person police department size. We want monitoring system, blue system, whatever system. Back when it was body cams, these are the things that we want. And this is what we think. And then we can study. I think it'll just expedite what you're after. And then you can line up the people that you would have to get buy-in from along the union, like subpoena power, obviously really deep things that you're going after. That way we've done the research up front before there's no reason to have them on if that's something we're going after early. We don't have all our ducks in a row. I feel like these things are going to fall out of order if we don't have an order to what powers we want for the Oversight Commission, the ultimate powers that you want to endow on them. I think that needs to be settled, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner or Councilmember Bacon. Before you go, City Manager Hahn, if you don't mind, I think Commissioner Root wants to respond to that last comment, if that's okay with you.
Is what you're suggesting that we include that sort of thing in the goals, which we're hoping to start talking about tonight and hoping to continue on the 23rd?
You need an outline of what you want for the commission up front and then build it. from there. Like that, those are the discussions. Like, what do you want them to be? Like, do you want them access to personnel files? Do you want them at, like, those are the things like that I think are, need to be fleshed out. Like, what powers do you want? And then you can build the systems for the powers that you want to endow on them. And then you can start, then we have negotiating powers of what do you want them to actually do ultimately.
Thank you. City Manager Lahanas, please go ahead. Thank you for holding too.
On what Chris mentioned, so I'm not necessarily saying that every subcommittee has to have be an open meeting, but I would want to make sure, depending on what they're going to discuss, of whether it has to be an open meeting or not. I just want to make sure that we're not violating the Open Meetings Act by using subcommittees. So,
City Manager Hollins, you have you froze for you froze for a second there. We didn't hear that last sentence.
Okay, so I would want to Commission. Okay, so I would just say that if we're going to have subcommittees, I would just have our attorney review to make certain that it's a legitimate subcommittee that doesn't have to be an open meeting. Otherwise, it can potentially be not an open meeting, but I wanted to make sure before we launch into all these subcommittees. My other general concern was, I think that perhaps we're overbuilding it and that there's too many subcommittees and that you could potentially streamline it more. I tend to be where Ron is, where if you were to, that's why I mentioned in the first meeting, the second meeting, first meeting, that if we do the research and look at other Big Ten universities, look at other cities in Michigan of what they already have for policies, this group could then look at the policies you want to create, and then we can sort of work in that direction, and it could move things along much more expeditiously rather than having 5 groups working at the same time.
Thank you, City Manager Lahanas. And I guess that's what I thought we would be able to do, is be able to still be able to go and look at other municipalities by building, for example, the task group structure and scope. And within that time in between, we come back and report what that is. But I may have lost what the point was on there. So I'll go ahead and Commissioner Haro, please go ahead.
So I've actually put together a list of about 50 cities of similar size to East Lansing, just in terms of raw population. But we still have that consideration of this is a city of 50,000 people with another 50,000 sitting on campus, right? We can, so the closest approximation is actually West Lafayette, Indiana. And the only reason I know that is because I went to Purdue before MSU. So it's a city of almost exactly the same size with a student population almost exactly the same size. So we can always look to make those comparisons, but they're going to be sort of few and far between, right? Columbus just passed one of these significant reforms, but the city of Columbus is significantly larger than the city of East Lansing, right? So we have to take the sort of unique aspect of, who our population is in terms of the population of the city as well as MSU together. So that's, consideration of department size, total population served, which is closer to 100,000, if not slightly more than that. So I think we need to be careful about which cities we're using for that comparison in that sense.
Thank you, Commissioner Haro. I think, yes, please go ahead, City Manager Lahanas.
So, that's why I had mentioned we had already started doing research months ago, looking at 2 different lists of comparable cities. One is in Public Act 312, which is the binding arbitration that impacts police and fire in Michigan. There's something called comparable communities, and these are well-established lists of communities that have been found through an arbitration process to be similar to East Lansing. So we have lists where arbitrators looked at everything from taxable value to population to location to the presence of a university, perhaps, all that. So we have a 312 list of cities that we looked at, and then we also use Big Ten, because Big Ten is another list of sort of comparable, because we're a lot like these other Michigan cities, but we're also a Big Ten city. So I think somewhere between those 2 lists, you're right, Columbus wouldn't be similar, but West Lafayette, Iowa City, there are a number of Big Tens that are more similar. But between those 2 lists, if I bring those next week, the 312 type cities, I think you'll get a pretty good sense of a pretty good list of comparable communities that have been vetted in some way through an arbitration process. That may be helpful.
Thank you, City Manager. So can you, and I apologize, maybe I should know this already, but like from the Open Meetings Act presentation that we got and what was explained to us in that training, I could almost swear that we're able to meet as a subcommittee without violating the Open Meetings Act as long as we're below quorum. So, for example, we can be 3, 2, or even 4 people and have a discussion in individual group and then bring it forward. Are you saying that that's not the case?
Yeah, so I actually sent an email. I sent that information of the list that Chris presented to our attorney, and I've been following up with text. So I haven't had a chance to have a conversation because she wasn't available. But you know, her distinctions of what she wrote was those groups appear to be making decisions to present a sort of a final to the study committee. So if so, they have to be open to the public. If they're truly advisory, it could be private. So if it depends on how much weight you're going to give to them once they do that. So if you're going to take these policies that they recommend in large part and adopt them, then it really seems like what they're doing should be a public meeting. If they're going to give you a whole range of options and you're going to pick from 1 or 2 of them, then perhaps it's more advisory. So I'm just saying it might be hard to know the exact answer to that, and I just wouldn't want to do something on this very important work that that could violate the Open Meetings Act. But I think we just have to have more information, give it to our attorney in writing, and then she can give us an opinion, exactly who did the training on each of these subcommittees, what you think the product will look like, and then we can see if there should be an open meeting or not.
Thank you for that clarification. And the way that I understand, the way that I've always done subcommittee work is always been advisory. We have never made like a decision outside of the overall group. It's been data collected oriented, getting information, understanding what that is, and reporting back and advising to the group about what we are meeting about or what we're talking about or what we're discussing. But from all the times that I got in subcommittees, we've never made decisions that would violate the Open Meetings Act, as I understand how you explained it. And along with this one here, that's how I would view what our subcommittees would be doing. We would be getting information, finding out about other municipalities, collecting data, doing all these different things. And then once we have that information, we have a presentation format. And so that's just how I understand it. And I understand your concern, but that's been my experience. Any other commissioners have a comment? Commissioner Root.
I wonder if we could get the benefit of our council's opinion about this by asking the question in a different way. If we could ask, what is it that the subcommittees must avoid doing, must agree not to do, so that they can function? And we can go ahead and get going and get work done there. Certainly the idea of coming up with a almost ready recommendation that they hope that will just get approved by the full committee, is not a good way to operate. And that was not how I was thinking about it. I think we could agree not to do that. I think if we could get a list of things we're allowed to do and a list of things we're not allowed to do so that we could get started, I would be much, I think we'll be able to get going more quickly if we do that, rather than say, well, we don't know whether we can have these committees. We don't know whether the committees can meet on certain topics. It feels like we can't get going with that approach.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. And maybe I'm totally wrong, but here's as I understand it. You're saying that let's get a list of what we're not supposed to be doing. Let's continue discussion about which committee work we'll do, subcommittee work we're doing, and we'll expect to hear about, before we meet, obviously, but in time for us to be able to meet in between our meetings, get that list of what we're supposed to not be doing in order to be able to have the subcommittee. Is that what you're saying, or did you mean something else with that?
Yeah, although I would think research is something we're allowed to do. And I would like, I think we need to be doing research before our next meeting in a number of these committees. I would like to be able to set up the committees so they can get started doing research. Maybe, I don't know what else we can definitely agree that we can do, but I would like to get started doing the things we're allowed to do, because I think otherwise we're just going to feel right away that we're running out of time.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. Any other comments from any? Please go ahead, City Manager Johannes.
I think doing research and gathering a wealth of information to present to the group is certainly probably something that would fall in subcommittee. Coming up with a recommendation and drafting a policy that you look to propose would probably not fall. You know what I mean? That would go too far. If you said this is the policy we should adopt, that probably would go too far. So
I think we could agree to that. That the subcommittees will not draft policies. That the subcommittees will be bringing information to the full committee to draft policies. I don't think that would be a problem.
Does that sound comparable, City Manager Johannes, and going that approach then?
Fit with what our attorney was saying, in my understanding as well. So
okay, very good. So the next step in regards to doing that, with the understanding that we're not drafting policy, we're collecting information, talking about the information we get. With that, going back to the committee work, based on what you see here as the 5 committees presented, I know Councilman Bacon talked about having too many and things like that. But I wanted to get some feedback about any commissioners about the participation and possibly participating within the subcommittee under the mindset of what we just discussed. Yes, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchinson.
Yes, I'm I guess I'm kind of mixed on this. I do see value in doing some work in between, like getting the research and all of that. There's certainly value in that, so that we're not here, almost like Groundhog's Day, repeating kind of some of the things we've done in the last couple of meetings, and still trying to gain our footing. Listening to Councilmember Bacon, I actually hear what he's saying also loud and clear, that we need to really identify what's the authority that we want the Oversight Commission to have and be able to do. And so there's some places have there's 3 different forms of a citizen review, right? So there's the an audit and monitor type thing model. Then there's also an investigation focused model, and there's a review focused model. And so I think what we need to do is determine what are our limitations on whichever model we're going to be going with. What is, like Councilmember Bacon says, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What is it that we've got to have a starting place of, okay, here's the moon and the stars of what we would like to be able to have the authority to do. This not us, but the permanent commission to do, and then back into the reality of what we can get, and then start to formulate that working plan around that. And so right now, I know we're kind of floundering a little bit. And I thank Chris and Sade for the tremendous amount of work that went into putting this together, because this does certainly give us something from which to kind of begin to get our minds wrapped around of what it is we're trying to accomplish. But I do think we have to kind of get a little bit more of a focus still yet. So this is great work. It's certainly, and I'm not saying throw out the baby with the bathwater, saying no, let's not use this. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that we might still have more work to do with just kind of what is it we're really still trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison. Any other comments? Sorry about that. I was apologize. Thank you, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison. I'm interested to hear from some other commissioners, because this is really a big deal, pivotal point about how we go forward and what we do or don't do. And it's definitely, we need to understand where you're at on how to go forward, because here we are in our third meeting. And I appreciate the comments that Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton put into us, but I need to know personally, like, what do we need to do now, and how do we get set up for the next meeting? What do we do in between? How do we get progress starting from this point? We have a tentative work plan in play and a schedule, and I'm hearing a couple of commissioners talk about it. It just, I don't have a feel for how everyone else feels about what we have presented in front of us and what we don't want to do or do as far as the total body. Yes, Commissioner Williams, and then City Manager Lahanas.
Well, you're just calling on me because I unmuted myself.
I thought I saw your hand. I thought I saw your hand raised. So.
No. Well, I was starting to think that certainly my concern is on the structure and scope and the powers of the committee, and I kind of agree that what we put in the report and what data we get are kind of secondary to what kind of structure we're going after. So I guess I guess I've come to agree that we should talk about the structure, scope, power thing first, and that would dictate or influence, for example, what we put in the report or what data we use.
Thank you, Commissioner Lahanas, or excuse me, City Manager Lahanas.
I got a motion. Thank you. So, my thought in why I proposed a pretty simple schedule, and it was enhanced by Commissioner Williams's list of people to come speak, was if you just start having speakers every meeting, and you ask for a robust amount of data on what other cities like us are doing, cities that are Big Ten, cities that are Michigan comparable cities, other cities that have the policies in place, and we just start bringing that stuff in. You don't have to come up with a full structure before you start working. Over the next 3, 4, 5 meetings, you'll be learning, and you'll start to see what it is you want to do as you're getting these policies from other cities, and then you'll figure out what your gold standard is. But during that time, you can hear from labor attorneys, you can hear from other cities and commissioners who have this in place. You can hear from, as Eric mentioned, union side, you can hear from all these people, and you're learning. I think you're trying to set up a full structure of how you're going to structure this thing. I just think if you get into it and start your learning process, this will all become clearer to you. And there's no need to keep waiting to start learning. Just have people speak every week. Have a presenters present every week off of Eric's list, which was a good list, almost too comprehensive because there were too many weeks. We didn't have enough weeks for all the presenters. That's why I tried to thin it out a little bit, but it's your choice. Have these people start presenting, starting at those, hear from the public, and then you will start to formulate what you want this gold standard thing to look like. And then you can begin to craft that. But at this point, I don't think there's a lot to learn right now, and a lot of people who can present to you, and you can ask lots of good questions. So I think every week you should have a presenter, and you should be asking questions, and then look at some other policies. What other policies do we want? Keep going. And then by January, you'll start to be ready to start to formulate what you want this thing to look like. And I don't know if you need 5 subcommittees to do that. I just think it might be overkill. I think this doesn't have to be that complex of a process.
Thank you, City Manager Lahanas, for the comments. Any other comments in regards to item 3.2? Yes, Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton.
I love what he just said. I do think because we are still learning, and we don't come from the same, perspective in getting entrenched in knowledge. So we can really have a good, strong basis from which to build from.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton. Yes, Commissioner Root.
It seemed to me that saying we need to look at goals and we need to look at structures and scope It sounds very similar to being suggested as alternatives. Looking at scope and structure is about what authority do you want it to have? How does it work? What places are doing it well? It's looking for the same information. If you start with the goals, which is what are the priorities for what we want to accomplish, and then we look at alternative structures and scope, that's how you operationalize getting the goals done. So that was what I thought both the work plan and the small groups were suggesting. I can understand that 5 subgroups may be too many, and maybe we could thin those out. But I don't, the presenters that Eric has suggested are not people who are going to be talking to us about optimal structures and scopes of oversight commissions. They're talking about specific issues, I think. So I think if we listen to them, we're actually not, if that's all we're doing at our meetings, we aren't moving ahead in our work. And the idea of having a group about the report isn't that right now people are going to start writing the report. I mean, maybe Sade can speak to this again. I think what she was saying was there might be some introductory materials, parts of the report that people could start working on sooner. Not that people would start working on some of the recommendations for the study committee, oversight commission right away.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did you want to weigh in on that at all, Commissioner Callwood?
Yeah, so the part about the report is, so my understanding is that there's no, I don't know even what the structure of this report is supposed to look like. And so just having a group that is also just keeping that in mind. So also if we have some working bullet points, or even starting to write this report in sections. So for example, if we have to put something in this report that includes something along the lines of background of why we're putting this together, we can have that done and out of the way. As I mentioned last time, my big concern is waiting until the very end to write a comprehensive report and having all of us trying to chime in. We're already an hour and 6 minutes in and we still really haven't moved forward. So this is what I'm saying, is that I don't want us to fall into this trap. So if we have a particular subgroup that's also kind of just keeping that part in mind and having some things outlined for the larger group to discuss and like approve, like, okay, we can get parts of this report done and out of the way so that we can focus on the crux of everything, which is like the biggest thing is like the structure and scope and what the oversight would, have authority over. So we can focus on those things that are going to take time to write. I don't know if we're planning on bringing up like a Word document here and writing this report here together. I imagine either way we do it, it's going to take a long time. So having some of that stuff going as we're still listening to these presentations and talking through other things would probably, again, get us moving along so that we're not here in April like, crap, we don't have anything written. We've talked about a lot of things. We have some bullet. So I think that was more of my intention behind like even having a few people keeping us on track with that. And I think that's the other thing with these work groups is just keeping us going on these conversations so that we're not missing things. We have folks that are, if they have particular interest in specific areas, can talk to these areas and bring it back to the larger group together. That was kind of like my...
Thank you for that input, Commissioner Caldwell. Anyone else want to weigh in that we haven't heard from in regards to, maybe breaking out and having the opportunity to have people get together in subgroups, doing work at a section at a time, or more focusing, from what I think I understand, is goals and scope discussion and understanding what that is first. Yes, please, Commissioner Garcia Jr.
So you can remember that when we first started meeting, I was proposing subgroups and getting at it and getting working at some things, because we're also, I don't think anxious is the word, but we're ready to get going, and we should have done this a couple meetings ago, but I mean, this is all good what we've been doing anyways. I want to hear from best practices. I know I mentioned that before, best practices of similar sized departments. We're not the only ones going through this right now. It's nationwide. And then maybe in a couple months or a couple meetings, I shouldn't say a couple months, after hearing from these best practices, these similar sized departments of going through the same issues we're going through and what they have done, maybe we can learn something from them and then proceed into our work groups. I like what Sade is saying about the report. Yeah, we got to get on that right away. So I know I sound confusing here, but maybe we break up into these subgroups, but we really should hear what similar sized departments and issues going on in similar sized cities have experienced and the work they have done before we really get down and dirty and start doing our work.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia Jr. I like how you kind of plugged in and still want to do a little bit of what we're talking about. Yes, Commissioner Root.
Wondering who you think can give us those kinds of reports.
Who do I think can give us?
Yeah, you're saying we should be hearing from people about what comparable cities are doing in terms of good practices and oversight commissions. Who are we going to hear from? How are we going to figure out who to hear from, and who are those folk going to be?
So Cedric had mentioned, and also George had mentioned some similar sized cities that they've identified. Let's hear from them.
So we'd ask somebody from their oversight commission, for example?
Absolutely. That's the idea I had. I don't know if that's what you had in mind, Cedric.
He's not in agreement with that. Yes, City Manager Lahanas.
As I said, the City of Ann Arbor has a policy similar to what we have looked at in the past. So we could ask their chair to come on as one of the people to speak. The purpose of the whole thing with asking a union rep attorney, a city rep attorney, all these people is the policy that you'll inevitably create has certain constraints on it, potentially. And if you don't know those parameters, we can spend a lot of time without actually figuring out the sort of outer parameters of what you're recommending. So I think they're directly relevant. I mean, the list that Eric came up with was a very good list. I mean, like I said, I think it got a little expansive, and it's you just don't have the time to do all of that learning. And also the other thing is, I think your deliverable is more of a policy and less of a report. And I think that you have to focus on not overbuilding this again. Your final thing is going to be, what should the structure of an oversight committee look like? And you probably want to report to somehow back up what you're doing, but the deliverable is a policy, and it may be several pages long. It's not necessarily, a paper that I think you got my point.
Thank you, Seaman Achanj. Did you have something to say, Commissioner Williams?
It seems to me that in cities of East Lansing size, they have their ordinances and policies and so forth, just like East Lansing does on their websites. So it's not necessary, in probably in most cases, to bring some person in to talk to us. You can get a heck of a lot of information off the internet.
That's the research to say if they have one or not, or what structure it takes. But it might be useful to hear from the Ann Arbor Commission member to hear how it's working. What do they actually do? Is it effective? Because the paper, I've seen the paper, I saw their paper policy 2 years ago. I'd like to know how it works. Do they feel it's effective? Do they feel it provides meaningful oversight? When people come with complaints, do they feel they can address those complaints, or is it a frustration for everybody involved? Because then that may judge how you want to look at this. So that's what I'm thinking of. By hearing specific people speak about ones that you may want to look at, that can stop us from making obvious mistakes, I think, by hearing their experience. Sure, we can get lots of policies. I've got lots of policies already.
To respond to that, this is an awfully controversial area, and there are going to be people on both sides in all cities, not just two sides. So if you get a person to come in and talk about how things are going in Ann Arbor, whether they're going swimmingly or awfully, it'll on what side they're on, and we could spend a lot of time making that kind of an evaluation. So just that point.
Thank you. I thought Commissioner Garcia wanted to speak, but please, Commissioner.
So to respond to Eric's point, I think perhaps what City Manager Johannes is talking about is looking at specific evaluations, right? So if there is a city of similar size who has implemented this program and has had an evaluation conducted, right? Not their own sort of personal assessment, do we feel like this is good? So, right, talking about measurable outcomes, right? Has the number of complaints been reduced? Have there been fewer complaints but more complaints sustained, right? Whatever that metric is that they're using as a measure of effectiveness, right? And there's obviously going to be variability there, but I think that represents a pretty good starting point. If we can identify these cities, pick out a few where these sorts of things have been in operation for a certain period of time, right? Not 3 months, but maybe 3 years, and then look at some of their specific performance measures to see, that's at least a starting point in terms of assessing whether or not that particular structure is doing what the process evaluation, if that specific structure is at least doing what they said they wanted it to do.
Thank you, Commissioner Harrell. And I appreciate the commissioners that have participated in this discussion. It's definitely something we need to hear. So I guess I'm kind of split here because I know like 3 or 4 you talked about. So let me jump back, please, to Commissioner Caldwell's point in regards to this report. If we're not going to do the subcommittee work in the way that we thought possibly when we had this presented to us, how do we go about that process in regards to this report or this policy that will be expected to come out with? Or is that an exception to kind of really what we're thinking about as far as focusing on goals and scope, but still having that in play, or a process or a system or some type of mechanism to, start this report or this policy? That's a question to all of you, to anyone that wants the answer. I'm just trying to understand where we're at. Yes, Commissioner Ellsworth Hutchinson.
I see it actually as both. I think that we can do both. As I was saying before, I don't know that we necessarily throw this document out, but it may end up pivoting a little bit and looking just a tad bit different. But at the meantime, the city manager did, we don't want to also spend a lot of time researching something when we don't even have a clue what our restrictions will be, or our objections, or what the uphill battle. So now we start to have the speakers come in and we can get some insight on what's really doable. And then we can, I do think that we can still work in some subgroup manner. Whether we do that at the very, like tomorrow, maybe not, but I do think that we're headed that way, but we do have to have some sense of, what are we doing? And I agree with you, Commissioner Williams, that we can still also look at, there's some research that we can do also, separate than just waiting for speakers. But there are also research and there's other like-minded or like committees for cities our size, police forces our size, and that's what's wrong in having them give us what those outcomes have been that they've seen. I think we need to be doing a lot of things at once and not one thing at a time.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellsworth Hutchinson. I think I agree with you in regards to being able to still do research. And I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier in regards to in between time, what can we do? Well, can we keep this moving, as Commissioner Caldwell, so we're building off something this meeting in a way that we're getting work done. And it sounds like even though some of the commissioners want to maybe focus more on scope and goals and what are we doing and why, there's still room for us to still have an opportunity for some of us anyway to do that research. And when you talk about research, Commissioner Ellsworth, I just said, do you have any examples of like the research topics that you're talking about or that comes to mind? If not, no worries. But I'm just curious to see where you're at with that, because it's really important, because I know that this policy report, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be very, very essential for us to really have it be comprehensive in a way to where we start and to where we end, and when we hand it over as a recommendation.
Well, yeah, just a couple of things. I mean, I've heard it mentioned a couple of times tonight already on the scope and goals of this, and that was actually one of the tenets that we looked at last week. What is the report called? I might be saying it wrong because I'm newer to this process and all the terminology, but is it NACOM or something like that? NACO. That was one of the tenets that they had in there, is looking at the scope and goals. So I think that then someone could be looking at some research on that. But then also, what is it that you really want the authority to be for this oversight commission? So what is it that we want them to be able to do, and be looking at some organizations or some police departments or communities or cities or whatever that have implemented some oversight citizen review boards, and what are their tenets? What are they looking at? What do they have the authority to do? And so I think that, there are some things that we can start looking at right now, because this, as Commissioner Bacon said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already know that there are places out there that have these in place. And so if we just kind of get focused on, I'll raise my hand and say, okay, I'll start to look at some of these cities and what they have in place. And then, somebody else can say, okay, well then I'll look at this or that, or two or three of us look at, are looking under the same things, but they're out there already. And so I think I heard someone say it doesn't have to be that complicated. I think we might be making it harder than it has to be, as we're trying to kind of get our sea legs under us and figure out what it is, what direction we really need to go in. I think we just start with the obvious. Who has these already in play, and let's start to look at them, that where they look similar to our size, and let's start there. But we've got to start somewhere. And otherwise, all of our conversations every time we meet will be like this. It's kind of like what I was saying before. It's kind of like that repeat. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot, Commissioner Ellsworth. That's just in on that, and that was helpful. City Manager Lahanas, and I just had a quick question for you. You said that you already have some type of comparison city structure in play that you had been doing research on already, and things like that. Is that something that could be possibly presented to us in a way, along with the other things that we need when we start collecting this information, so possibly other commissions can then have that discussion with how does it work here?
Sure, I have some data that I had an intern do several months, probably 8 months ago, on what the structures look like from other cities, comparable cities in Michigan, and then other Big Ten cities. So I can share all that. I haven't looked at it in several months, but I can gather all that and share it all with the commission, whatever we have.
I think that'd be very, very helpful. I know for me, I can't really speak for everyone, but that would be helpful. And I know Commissioner Harrell, thank you, City Manager Lahanas. And I know Commissioner Harrell, you said that you looked at 12, 15 cities already that's comparable to what we got going on and got some information already. Is that what you said?
I didn't start collecting information. I just have a list of cities of comparable size.
Okay.
So I think City Manager Lahanas' list is probably a little more comprehensive.
Okay. Yeah. I want to make sure that we can kind of keep things together. And I know you did something, that he's doing something or has something, but then at the same time we go our different ways after we get off this call. But So let's get to a point so then we can possibly move on, because I don't think we're going to make any decisions about the tentative work plan in whole tonight from what I'm getting, what other commissioners are focusing on at this moment. I may be wrong about that. So when we talk about possibly, again, going back to the report, the data, and the summary of all that, are we saying right now that we just need to start that process and we need to have a couple of us volunteer to make sure we start keeping track of that summary of that information as we go along?
I don't. Summary of what? Oh, sorry, Senia, go ahead.
I'm sure that there are probably some structures out there available, or like templates, but like what goes into, like, how do you write a policy? I don't know how to do that. I'm not sure if other people do, but I don't even know what that's supposed to look like. So again, just having some of this information, again, could be helpful, but I don't know how to write a policy.
We can grab a bunch of them from other cities, including Ann Arbor, and provide those to you with the stuff that I have, the research I have already, and it will all become pretty clear to you. There's nothing that spectacular about it, and it's quite simple. You'll get to visualize it very easily.
Thank you, please, Commissioner Garcia Jr.
Departments are infamous for copy pasting each other, and that's what they call them best practices. And so that's why it's important to see the work of others. It's a different template, shot writing policy. I've done that for some things back at LPD way back in the day, but by looking at others, it's going to be very helpful, and you'll probably turn on some light bulbs to you and go, "Oh yeah, I understand that." But the first thing you want to do is start looking at other policies.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia Jr. Before you go, Commissioner Haro, not to put you on the spot, City Manager. So what are you thinking the turnaround time, or kind of the time you need to kind of look at and get it, and maybe have something like that for us to go through?
I can have a bunch of information for you for your next meeting. I mean, it's not going to be 100% of what you want, but it'll be a broad range of stuff of what other cities have and model policies from other cities, and you can take a look at it. And I think that'll just give you a good thought of a direction, and maybe just put some thoughts in your mind about where you want to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Rowe. Then Commissioner Garcia Jr. Please go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify, right? So City Manager Lahanas, our deliverable is essentially a policy recommendation in the form of a model policy.
It'll actually just be sort of what other cities like us, Big 10 cities, and what comparable Michigan 12 cities have in place already. And if they do have, what does it look like?
Okay, thank you. And so, not to speak, I think probably Shai is coming at this from a similar standpoint to myself, sort of like a literature review, right? If we're going to put a report together, if we're going to make this policy recommendation, there's a slight difference from why we're making this recommendation in terms of, well, this is sort of what the research says, as opposed to sort of this is best practices, and these are cities that we're basing our model on the experience of these cities. And so, maybe that means less work up front in terms of a report.
So if I could just, the quick other thing that I want to mention about Mr. Williams' recommendation is that having these experts from union side attorney, city side attorney, all these other people speak kind of will stimulate your thinking, and your point is we don't want to just accept a policy from some other city because maybe there's good reasons not to, or maybe there are good reasons to accept it. And then that sort of like is rounding out your thinking and your background on it. So I think both things are helpful, because you may not want to, I'm where Commissioner Garcia is. A lot of times cities cut and paste, and they say, this is what other cities are doing, it's working for them. We cut and paste and we use it. You're not going to want to be that simple about it. You're going to want to, put more thought, so we look at more cities and you hear from other experts, and then you ask the questions, and then, so a deeper dive, not quite as simple as cutting and pasting, but not creating an original research as if we don't get to look at what other people are already doing.
Thank you, City Manager Lahanas. Please go ahead, Commissioner Root, and then Commissioner Garcia Jr.
I think it was Cedric who said a little while ago that there are some cities where there have been evaluation reports recently that might be useful. And I have looked at a couple that I find really valuable. You know, the difference between what does a policy look like and what do people who are, I mean, there are a lot of cities that are on their second or third version of an oversight commission. And I find that really so much more practically, you know, concretely helpful to see how they're talking about it. So I think that's another way to think about the research, is to think about cities that have done some recent reports about why they want to change what they're doing and what they want to do differently. And maybe, you know, some of us could look for those. I also certainly agree that comparable sized cities is a useful thing to be aware of. But I think we should not limit ourselves in that way. I think there are some very interesting lessons to be learned from some cities that wouldn't necessarily land in a list of the same size or Big Ten. I see Cedric nodding his head. We don't want to miss some really valuable lessons learned simply because they didn't land on the list of population and size of the police department.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. Commissioner Garcia Jr., please go ahead.
Eric points out that there are agency profiles on the NACOL website. There are about 15 of them. People have done a huge amount of this work. And that's why I think of it as a research task, you know, for us to learn about that work. There's a lot of material out there. Ann Arbor, I've been watching what's going on in Ann Arbor. I think it's interesting that they're also still pretty young. So we might learn some things, but I don't want to limit by, you know, the category of city too tightly.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. Commissioner Garcia Jr., and then Commissioner Williams.
I agree with everything Chris just said. But Cedric really piqued my interest earlier, and I think it was Lafayette, Cedric, you were mentioning. I mean, everything you said about the population of the city and then the neighboring campus population. And of course, George's list, I'd love to see that. But even if Cedric, do you have anyone in that area, you say you're from there, that you could reach out to and maybe get some information from out there?
So that's where I did my undergraduate degree. I will, I'll have to see if there's anybody that's still there. That was quite some time ago.
Okay. And then the last thing I want to say is, when I mentioned copy paste, maybe that was the wrong thing to say. Exactly what Mr. Lahanas was saying. You get bits and pieces from different agencies, and like when we revamped our disciplinary process at LPD, we went through a matrix. We reached out to Phoenix, Arizona, because they were like the forefathers of doing a matrix type disciplinary process. But we kind of molded it to what the things that we had going on here with our unions and with our current disciplinary process and all that. So it's not just cut and paste. That was a bad thing to say.
All right. One more. Commissioner Williams, did you want to weigh in on this before because I think what we're going to have to do is make a decision here. Please, but go ahead with your comments.
I was just going to say, and Ms. Root said it for me. I put in the chat a link to the NACOL website, where they have profiles, something like an evaluation of a series of civilian oversight boards on their website.
Okay.
Those are large and small cities, so they're not necessarily comparable in size or football league to East Lansing, but they have ideas that could be transferable to any size of the city.
So if I understand, and please jump in if I'm wrong, so it sounds like the discussion of the work plan and work group, item 3.2, if anything, it would be more appropriate once City Manager Lahanas gives us some particular data points on some different things, and maybe looking at it then is kind of how the commission is thinking about it. Is that sound kind of where people are going with that, and a little bit more comfortable with this document that's been presented tonight? I see a couple of nods. Yes. Yes. Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Harrell.
Isn't there something we could do between now and then?
Yes, Commissioner Williams, but I'm trying to understand kind of really the consensus of the body. Commissioner Harrell, please go ahead.
I think if we have a concrete plan to have that data or a brief presentation from City Manager Lahanas at our next meeting, we can still take some time today to sort of parcel out some tasks that maybe individuals want to do to bring to that conversation for our next meeting, at the very least, so that we are accomplishing something.
I agree. Do you have any examples that just pop out of your head?
I mean, so without knowing exactly what's on City Manager's list, it might mean, looking at some of those other cities that we realize are not comparable to. So it might mean, again, working backwards, right? Looking at, some recommendations for oversight that have come from consent decrees in places like Ferguson and Baltimore and New Orleans, even though they're not directly comparable to East Lansing. And then sort of mashing that up with what we might look at from comparable cities when we get that information from City Manager Lahanas.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Commissioner Root.
That sounds good to me. Let's get a little group together that's going to look at not comparable size cities so that we know we're not going to overlap work.
All right. And so when you talk about little groups, we got one in play, I guess. What's the other ones that you think, based on what we've all talked about, when it comes to being able to have one or two people discuss and get that information?
I was suggesting that up to 4 of us could work on that non-comparable size cities before next week.
Okay. Oh, okay. So just the one.
That would be a temporary subgroup.
Gotcha.
That would try very hard not to overlap with work that's already being done.
Who is interested in doing that? Garcia. All right. So we have Commissioner Harrell, Commissioner Root. We have Commissioner Reed Davis, Commissioner Garcia Jr., and Commissioner Harrell. And within this work, obviously, we want to make sure we stay within a certain number of people who are doing this research, which is 4, I believe, based on the number of our commission. So I guess really we have to decide kind of, go ahead, please, Commissioner Root.
I'm willing to drop out of the group with the understanding that I can just send you things I find.
Okay, there you go.
No communication beyond that. I think that's allowed.
Okay. And so please, Commissioner Garcia, go ahead.
I was just going to recommend rock, paper, scissors, but that's, think about make the numbers better. I also think Sade, with the reporting piece to it, is looking at other policies. Maybe that's a good time to just at least get started on that. So that might change our numbers from 6 to maybe somebody that wants to join that. Again, we're not making 4 or 5 groups here, but I really think that Sade is onto something there as far as let's not get behind the 8 ball and then have to have a written document like with a 3-week deadline.
Before you go, Commissioner, I agree with you 1,000%. That means we have 2 strong independent bodies of people doing some different things, and I think that's a great place to be compared to where we were just at. Commissioner Root, go ahead.
Since I'm not going to be on the looking at non-comparable cities, I'd be happy to work with Sade on what a report might look like. I don't know if anybody else would like to do that, just what the sections could be.
To make that first group 4, I'll join Chris and Sade, and then maybe we can start looking at policies of other departments.
Okay.
But can we share that information, what the first group is coming back to as far as similar type departments, so that we can maybe reach out and get their policy as well? I mean, it's kind of intermingling work there.
Yeah, it's tricky because obviously because the OMA dynamic, and we just got to be really, really careful.
Just report it back. I don't know.
Let's say that Sade's group will not look at other cities' policies.
Okay.
So that the group that is doing that will know that that's their task. And anybody who wants to send information to them can send it to them.
Got it.
So
for those 4 people?
So we have, please raise your hand for the first group. Commissioner Hero.
What's the first group?
Non-comparable cities. Commissioner Hero, Commissioner Williams. Please raise your hand. I think it was Commissioner Reed Davis, and it was one other person.
I think it was Noel. I don't think you needed to drop out. If you'd like to stay there.
Helen, did you?
Oh, sorry.
I can take your place if you want to do the reporting portion of it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then for the second group, the report of the data and all that kind of stuff we have, please raise your hand if you're interested in doing that. Commissioner Caldwell, Commissioner Root, Commissioner Garcia Jr. Great. There we go. And we don't have to make, correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Newman or City Manager Lahans, we don't have to make a vote on these 2 different groups or anything like that since they're not really doing anything but collecting that information. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think if they haven't, you're just asking people to collect data. What I wouldn't do is share data in between groups of more than 4 people and comment on it. I would just collect the data, you know what I mean? Not have ongoing discussions back and forth with more than 4 people.
All right.
We already made that work by saying that the second group will not look at policies from other cities. Right. So there will not be conversation to be had between those 2 groups because we've separated the work clearly.
This is a beautiful thing. Thank you, commissioners, for really stepping up. We need you, and I appreciate you doing what is going to be done before we meet again. It's really, really important stuff that we have something to build off of. So thank you. I can't tell you that enough. All right. So I think that concludes our discussion for item 3.2. We jumped over, yes, Commissioner Williams.
Do we have emails for everybody?
Yes.
Someplace?
Yes.
All right, I'll look for it.
If you have any questions about anyone you want to get a hold of, Diane is your lady. She'll get you the emails, the numbers, the information. And I just want to say this, okay? So a couple of commissioners did a reply all, and we don't want to do that at all for any reason at all. If you're trying to figure something out, your best way is to communicate with Mrs. Schaefer. Then she can disseminate everything else. I know there was a couple of emergency situations. Then we had, a couple of commissioners or commissioner that wasn't able to make it. And I think that went all through everyone. We do not want to do that at all, or even get into the habit of that. It's very, very important that we do not do that. Okay. In the OMA kind of really, the presentation really talks about how important that is and why. And the type of work that we're doing is easily going to be scrutinized by a lot of different other people. We want to make sure we do everything we can as transparent as we can without bringing any attention to anything that we don't intentionally not want to do. So please be mindful of that. Is that how Mrs. Newman, how I need to have that said? Okay. All right. Yes, Commissioner Josephson.
So I know that it might not be in accordance to the rules, but is there a way that we can do maybe after this, like a mini breakout session so we can talk with those 3 other people or 2 other people that are in that smaller group, just so we don't just leave this meeting and then next week it's like, okay, wait, what are we doing? Because it's going to get a little crazy with me personally traveling home for Thanksgiving. So I just want to get some things established before maybe tonight's over.
If I understand what you're asking, unfortunately, we can't do the breakout format just because the OMA and people need to have access to that. But as we do break out and as you seek to get the other commissioners' information from Diane, then that would be an appropriate group for you to have that intimate contact with via however you guys want to do it. And if you need any, you go ahead.
We can do like smaller Zoom sessions without having to alert anybody else that we're communicating. We can email each other.
As long as what Mr. Lahana said, as long as we're just collecting that information, not discussing policy and all those different things, you stay away from those two criteria, you're good to go.
Okay.
Okay.
I think Helen was just asking, can 4 people stay later tonight? Keep it an open meeting. Just the rest of us can leave and they can have 15 more minutes or something.
Yeah.
Is there a problem with that?
I don't know the answer to that. That's up to staff to give me that answer.
Ask Justin, who's hoping to run the meeting, but you also can email each other. If it's 4 of you, you can say, I found these cities to look at. You look at those cities and you look at those cities and you do that. That's fine, as long as you're just gathering information and doing research. The 4 of you are talking. It's not 5 or 6, so it's not a quorum. And you're just coming up with a range of recommendations or a range of options to look at.
Does that help you, Commissioner Josephson? Okay. Are you clear and you feel comfortable with being able to contact and get a hold of whoever you need to get a hold of? Okay. Really want to make you feel like you have, an apparatus. Yes, Diane Schaefer.
I can go ahead and resend the list of all the commissioners with all their information to everyone as well, so everybody will have that information.
Thank you. We need that. Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. So I think that concludes item 3.2. We're going to jump back to, it is still maybe something that we can talk about, but item 3.1, as far as the December meeting schedule and how it stands right now, are we probably in agreement? We're going to leave that alone for the moment and kind of figure some things out by the next meeting, then maybe have that happen. Anyone disagree with that? All right. So let's move on to item 3.3, identify additional information needed from East Lansing Police Department. So we got something coming from City Manager Lahanas and a great package of different things that we discussed tonight. But when we talk about staff and we talk about the information possibly from East Lansing Police Department, is there anything that you guys want to discuss about what we may need in regards to going forward? Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Are there any specifications associated with these proprietary early intervention systems? That any brochures work and what they require of a police department? That would be useful if they exist.
We'll be gathering data from all the different companies that provide that service, and so we'll have it available after we collect it. Not too sure how long, but we'll have it available to you later on.
Takes time.
Yeah, takes time, but we'll get that for you. No problem.
I do know, and I'm sure they all do, but they do presentations, and I know the rep that I had talked to about the Guardian system was very eager. I had told him, Chief Johnson, I had a meeting with you for something else, and he was, and I told him I'd mention it, but we didn't get the opportunity to have that discussion. But I don't know if you're already doing that, but I do know that at least that particular company is more than ready to give a presentation. They can do it via Zoom, and he said it's about 20-25 minutes, and it really talks about kind of how to do it, set up the administrative process, and all those different things when it comes to that. And I'm sure the other ones are similar to that as well.
Chair, did you want us to just gather the information, or did you want a presentation for the full commission?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's helpful at this point. Commissioner Root.
I think I'll be blunt. I think it's a lousy idea for the full study committee to look at for an EMS system. It's not EMS, early intervention system. I think the kind of thing we need to be responsible for is making suggestions that the police department have a policy that on EIS, and maybe some models for particularly good ones. I don't think we should be hearing from vendors. I think there are much more basic questions we need. Like, this whole group does not have a common knowledge of what complaints have been brought over the last number of years about officers in ELPD. If we're going to be, we clearly, one aspect of oversight is something about complaints. And we need some common understanding about what the recent complaint history is here. I think we also need some common understanding about recent use of force history in East Lansing. And what I'm thinking about on both of those topics is what the data are about incidents and what the policy is. What do you do? You know, what is the investigation system about complaints? And when somebody, when there's an incident where an officer has used a certain type of force, what happens next? You know, is there a review process? To my mind, that's something is basic information we need if we're going to think about how to have oversight over the department in these kinds of areas.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. And just for a point of clarification, I wasn't talking about having the early warning system vendors speak to us. I was talking in regards to speaking to them directly, just for a point of clarification. And so, but yes, I agree with you on that. Understanding the complaint process, I'm familiar with it and how it works in situations recently that we've had and some of the challenges with that. And I think that, again, the commissioners here on this group, it would be beneficial to find out and understand that complaint history a little bit better so they can grasp their minds around how they want to make that recommendation as well. So I agree with that 1,000%. And then obviously the same thing with the use of force. We got some really, really good start of information in regards to what's going on with some of the contact out there and how imbalances that is when it comes to particular people in the community. But I'd like to know more about those numbers in regards to, in those contacts, how many people were arrested, how many people were charged, how many people were let go, what kind of force was used in those situations. That would help us, I think, or myself, in regards to trying to really then advocate for not only those situations, but also advocate on the side of how to make change within that information. And so, if anything, I'm personally talking about getting more information in regards to what we've already been presented in some ways, and maybe take another layer back to that and find out some of the circumstances within those numbers, if that makes sense. Chief Johnson.
I think so. I think so.
And by all means, we can have a conversation about that, outside, but so you're not just kind of dropping that bomb. But I think again, with the history of complaints and the use of force in the particular data set that we just got, may be a great place for you and us to start there, since we already have that there, and build off that information.
We can do that.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm always available to, outside of what we're doing, as in some of our meetings. Commissioner Horo.
So I know we've sort of gone back and forth over the work plan, but for our next meeting on the 23rd, is that the meeting at which we're having the presentation on the complaint system? All right, so in preparation for that, during that meeting, in addition to some of the things that Commissioner Root mentioned, I would want, so I've read the use of force policies, but it's not clear to me whether or not, for example, East Lansing Police Department has a use of force continuum that they abide by. So I'd like to see something along those lines. I'd like us to have a little bit more of a discussion about some of the constraints on use of force from a legal perspective as well as from an administrative perspective, right? Because those are not necessarily the same things. Departments may prohibit certain things that the law allows, and hopefully not vice versa. And so, conversation I think about to what extent the department has policies that are restrictive, are there specific directives about when you can deploy a taser, when you can deploy a canine officer, right? There are jurisdictions in which literally every day somebody's bitten by a canine officer, right? So I think there are specific concerns about what we refer to as the prevalence and severity of force. How often does force get used, and when it gets used, to what extent is that force used? We're talking about low levels of force, command voice, right, then that's, but that ties into this use of force continuum, right? If you're talking about suspects engaging in passive resistance versus active resistance versus threatening behavior, right? I think all of that needs to be part of the discussion next meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Rowe. And we got somewhat of that force continuum understanding in a public hearing. And I know, Chief Johnson, that Deputy Chief Gonzalez and one of your captains did that. So I'm sure there's a base for you to build off of, so you don't have to go back and do all these different things. That really was that process that Commissioner Haro was talking about. Anything else? I think that's quite a bit for Chief Johnson to focus on for the time frame here. Is there anything else anyone wants to add to that? Commissioner Root? You're muted.
Do people in the study committee and does Chief Johnson think it's reasonable to cover both complaints and use of force in one meeting? As Cedric was pointing out, on the use of force topic, you're looking at policy and training and, the practice. And there's a similar, breadth on complaints. Can we do that all one night, or should we break it down?
Well, just to going off of Mr. Lahanas's comments reference, maybe like a half an hour type of presentation to also give the commission some time to work on other projects too. So I would, half an hour would be for one, maybe in a half an hour possible for a second one, so we can give the commission time to do their work also, instead of taking up the whole 2 hours just with our presentation material.
Chief Johnson, of those two presentations, which one? I'm sorry. Go ahead, City Manager Lahanas.
Say we'll just do it over the next 2 meetings, and
Yeah.
we'll just get the presentations together and start with complaints, or start with continuing, because I think that one is already more together, and then give us time to prepare complaint summaries stuff to have data to look at.
Okay, we can do that.
So,
does that sound cool?
So from right here is probably the use of force continuum presentation is going to be next, and then following that meeting we'll have the other one. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Chief Johnson, for that commitment. We appreciate that. All right, I think we'll move on from what we need from East Lansing Police Department. We'll go to item 3.4, discussing goals of the study committee and what we have for the Oversight Commission. I know that was part of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. And maybe I didn't communicate this very, very well, but I was looking to hopefully get a couple of versions of people's scope and goals in written communication to have on here to have comparisons. We do have obviously mine, and we have Commissioner Williams' input on this. So I just want you to understand that was what I was thinking it was going to happen, and so it wasn't something that this is what we're going to do, and that's it. But it was just more of kind of that perspective from what I understood of what we had discussed in the last meeting. So I'll open it up in regards, because it's pretty self-explanatory, and I know that some people needed to have this conversation in regards to wrap their head around kind of really some of the different things, although we do have 2 things set in play for some subgroups in there. Is there any questions or conversations based on possibly the written communication that has been submitted right here in front of you at this point when it comes to the goals proposed of the Oversight Commission, or what the Oversight Board should be working on when it comes to the information that you see before you? No? That's pretty surprising, because I know that you guys were kind of really wanting to kind of have that understanding earlier, and that's kind of why we got away from some of the stuff we did here. But yes, Commissioner Williams.
Well, what I sent in response to your request was my own view of the goals, and I would say that my major assumption on that was that we're living under the tyranny of this collective bargaining agreement, and the prospects of getting that changed to any significant extent is approximately zero as far as I'm concerned. I think we need changes in state law to have complaints considered at the state level, and we need some changes to give us access to personnel records of police officers. But that's, those are not something that the city commission can decide. So my vision of this was to find workarounds to the collective bargaining agreement. And I just came up with a few workarounds that I thought might be useful. One is to get a grip on the 9/11 dispatch decision, so that we don't always send a armed police officer to a scene where an armed person is not needed. Like one of these mental health response teams might be more appropriate. Another would need to confront change the collective bargaining agreement to do that. Another would be to have a policy where the city would drop charges against people who are accused of small offenses that might be used to cover up instances of misconduct. Another would be to drop FOIA charges where people are requesting information about the police. And so I had a series of those workarounds where hopefully we could have the committee, have the Civilian Review Board take actions that did not directly confront the collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. And just to speak on my proposed is I really listened to some of what the commissioners had brought to my attention and some of their concerns. I know Commissioner Hero talked about budgeting concerns. I know Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison talked about, really focusing on what our mandate is and how to go about that and why it's important that we're doing that and having that within our scope. And a couple of other comments that I remember that we had back there. So mine's is in alignment with Commissioner Williams, is avoiding having, a conflict with them. What can we do? What can we lay out now? So we don't have to have that back and forth or that approval from outside entities in regards to what our scope and goal is and how we go about that. And so I really tried to hone in a couple of the comments and concerns that people brought to us in our previous meeting. And this is what I came up with. And I just kind of really talked about why the outcomes of those and why those were important in mind. So I'm with you, Commissioner Williams, in regards to kind of really my appreciation of being able to get something on there and make sure that we have a point. So with that being said, I think this is a great example of, when we talk about the report and the summaries and all that kind of stuff, having this kind of input from commissioners and having a way to start keeping track of that. So then we can pull this information away from and then have it imposed into the presentation or the policy or whatever it may be going down the road. These, I think personally, are ways to do that. Any comments on items 3.4, questions, feedback? All right, we'll move on. All right, so we're at to item 0.4, staff reports. From Commissioner Hannes.
No, I have no reports unless the group has anything for us. We have all of our work sort of plotted out that we already discussed.
Anything from you, Mrs. Hardy? Anything more you want to add to the discussion, Chief Johnson? I'm seeing no's.
No, sir.
All right, thank you so much. Commissioner announcements. Do any commissioners have anything they want to announce? Commissioner Root, please go ahead.
It really isn't an announcement, but it's trying to clarify something from the meeting. If I understood correctly, that we're going to do use of force next week meeting, and then the following meeting is complaints. That means that the following meeting is December 7th. That means that that's not a meeting of a very different sort for public input. Is that correct?
Well, it shows.
How are we going to figure out what to do about public input? Are we just, we're gonna just think about that later?
As it stands right now, all we have is the 14th meeting. We don't have the 7th set up. And I thought that we were supposed to have our next meeting, then we're going to decide how we're going to do that. But I could be mistaken.
Oh, okay. So we don't have a date, we don't have the dates for the December meeting yet? Meetings? We haven't decided yet about December meetings?
I think all we have is that one on the 14th. Is that correct?
Well, is it possible to make a motion to hold meetings on the 7th and the 21st instead of on the 14th? So that we get 2 meetings in December?
It's very possible to make a motion. So you are making a motion that you would like to have meetings on the 7th and the 21st of December as opposed to just having one on the 14th. Is that correct? Is there a second to that motion? Just for a second, and then we can have that discussion. Yes, seconded by Commissioner Harrell. Can we have discussion on that motion? Commissioner Harrell, if you're talking. Yes, Commissioner Reed Davis, and then Shelley Newman, please go ahead.
Is it possible to have the meeting the 7th and the 14th instead of the 21st and just eliminate the week in between, just because that's the week of Christmas? And personally, I don't want to have a meeting that week.
Any other discussion about that? Yes, Mrs. Newman.
I consider that a friendly amendment. Meetings on December 7th and 14th.
Yeah.
There is some concern about other regularly scheduled commission meetings that could be held on the first Monday of the month.
There isn't anything yet. Do you think there might be some added?
I talked with Diane, and she said there isn't one that I know of, unless I'm mistaken, Diane. There's no meetings on the 7th at all that conflict with that time frame. Is that correct?
I checked the calendar and there wasn't one on the 7th or the 21st.
On the Zoom calendar or the annual calendar?
On the portal, on the online portal.
Okay.
So is that different than?
City Manager Lahanas.
No.
Just check on both of those dates to confirm by the next meeting, and we can then say the 7th. We understand you want the 7th and the 14th, and we will try to make that work. And we'll just check all the sources to make sure that there's no conflicts.
Commissioner Rowe.
Was there not concern that the 14th was the date of the East Lansing Public School meeting?
Yes, Commissioner Rowe.
I expressed that concern because that had tentatively been thought of as a big public input session for us. If it's a regular meeting for us, that's not a concern. And I think, Sherelle is making a very good point that probably for most folks, the 14th is more comfortable than the 21st.
So as I said with the amendment, so where are we at, Mr. City? So are you saying that you need to, before we can vote or talk about this, we need to find out if that's a possibility first?
So why don't we just say that you're proposing those dates and we will confirm them. We understand what you want and we will come back by the next meeting to confirm that those are both good. We will get whichever one of those times we can, either both or one or whatever's available by your next meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Callwood.
I know right off the bat I won't be able to make the December 7th meeting, but I can follow up with information. But I think I have another concern is that I don't know if the 14th as a proposed meeting would actually be my last meeting. Based on the OMA training that we had as of January 1st, 2021, you have to be present in person for these meetings. And I don't know where that leaves me, and I'm not sure who I'm supposed to ask if I'm going to still be a part of this commission.
I think we can get your answer right now. City Manager Lahanas, please.
I believe if we have a declared emergency under the state act, we can continue with virtual meetings, and I expect that we could have a continued emergency declared in the city. So I think into January and February, you likely will be safe, but we have to wait and see. I think I would plan for your continued participation at this point. That's what I would say. I can't speak for council on emergency, but I think that we would likely have that continue.
I guess my overall overall concern here is that, again, I continue to work, and then there will be a day, perhaps, maybe, unknown to everyone at this point, that's like, oh, okay, no longer can be a part. So it's a really tricky situation to be in, where I'm gonna still put my best foot forward, but then I just don't want to be met with like, thank you for all that you've done, and now you can't be part of that result. And I don't know what to do about that.
I think myself and other commissioners would think that's a really big deal. So we hope that, with this uncertainty, that that's not the case. And we'll do everything. I know I'll do everything in my ability to make sure that your commitment is honored and it continues to be honored for whatever capacity that we have. And I really feel City Manager Lahanas and others will do our best ability to make that be the case. Council appointed you for a reason.
I appreciate it.
All right. So I'm still a little bit confused. So we're proposing that, but we're not making a decision or voting on anything like that right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I understand the board's direction is you want to look for meetings on the 7th and the December 7th and 14th, and we will try to schedule those. We'll come back by next meeting to confirm that to you.
Thank you. That's clear for everyone else, I think. Commissioner Rowe, you got a question?
So just as a point of order, right? So there's been a motion and a second. Does that mean we need a motion to table until next meeting?
City Manager Hans, can you help me out with that?
Well, you gave us the direction. If you want to make it as a motion, that's fine. I just took it as a staff direction. I don't think you even need a motion because we're looking for dates for you to meet. But if you want to make it a motion and vote, you've directed us to find dates on the 7th and the 14th. Finish it up and vote. That's great. Either way.
Since it was your original motion, Mrs. Christine Root, Commissioner Root, you want to go ahead and just do it that way and wait to hear back?
There is a motion on the table, and I don't know how to get it off. I mean, I'm perfectly happy, George, with your formulation.
So you just withdraw the motion.
To get to yes for that.
Yes, I gotta just withdraw the motion. Whoever made it, withdraw it.
I would love to withdraw the motion.
Great.
All right.
All
right.
Thank you.
All right. So I can move on? Okay, thank you. Some of that Robert's rules gets a little tricky for me in there. All right, so old business. What we have on here is item 6.1, NACO commission models. And this was kind of thrown on here, but we didn't have any substance to this conversation because we're not ready for that. And that was assuming that this meeting went into a different direction. So if someone has a comment or anything in inference to item 6.1, I'll leave it as is and then move on. Yes, Commissioner Williams.
I'd like to hear everybody's views on this this homework assignment you gave us last time.
You're referring to the goals that we sent in for today?
Right, I did it. I want everybody else to be me too.
I asked, but we people have a choice to give us a run back if they want or not, and I'll ask again just for did anyone have any comments, suggestions, support of some of the two communications that we talked about with goal and scope? There you have it, Commissioner Williams. Okay, we got one. Commissioner Garcia Jr., please go ahead.
I'll just say if I was one of my students, I'd fail him, Mr. Williams, for not having my assignment in time, but I will revisit that. I like both did, and I certainly can get something to you by next meeting. How's that?
Thank you. And if anyone wants to, still send in stuff, we're not saying this is your only time to do that. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's just that I really thought it was important to really try, at least from my perspective, to capture some of the different concerns in that so that we can actually come in agreement with a baseline of some of those different things that's in this information. And then Commissioner Williams came in and just blew that up with his own version of what that was. And so that we have, that's a good problem to have. Commissioner Haro and then Commissioner Reed Davis, please go ahead.
I was just going to follow up Commissioner Garcia's point that all my students would tell you that I would read them the Riot Act, but then I'm a big softie, so I would take into consideration that perhaps, there have been extenuating circumstances for them not reading the assignment or not understanding what the assignment was. I think now that it's clear that we have homework, we should all endeavor to at least get something down on paper before next meeting that is reflective of what both of you did.
I appreciate that. And I guess I'm to blame because I didn't communicate that clearly enough. And only Commissioner Williams was the one that heard me. So that's on me, obviously. Commissioner Reed Davis, please go ahead.
Yeah, so being a student myself, taking 18 credits currently, I would like to say if we could get reminders about assignments that we have, that would be very helpful. And I would like to hear Commissioner Williams' goals that he submitted, just so I can have an idea.
Yes, I was trying to see how to do this because I wasn't quite sure if we're going to be doing groups and not groups. But going forward, since we're not going to be in majority of doing that, I can definitely maybe talk with Mrs. Schaefer, and we can kind of give those type of points in there about what to read. This is relevant or what have you as an option. I don't mind doing that if Diane doesn't when it comes to helping that process. In regards to, just for the sake of time, in regards to Mr. Williams's going over that, he kind of briefly went over some of those key points. It is in the agenda packet for you to review, and you can follow up with him and talk with him individually about some of these recommendations, just because we're already at 8:15 of our meeting when it comes to that. If that's fair to be able to do for you. I appreciate your flexibility with that. All right, let me jump back. Any other comments in regards to old business? Great. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion recognized by Commissioner Garcia Jr. and seconded by Commissioner Reed Davis. Again, thank you guys for stepping up. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you, staff and Councilmember Bacon for helping us out and working with us tonight. And we really appreciate you. Good night. All right, it's a wrap. That's a wrap. I think I forgot to vote on the adjourning, I just cut everyone off. So, oh well, I don't think anyone's going to get on me about that. Thanks for guys for joining me tonight. I know these are long, and I'm sure a minority of you get through this whole thing. So I appreciate you. Take care.